And I would also share with you the three main reasons why Jewish people do not follow Jesus. Up until a few years ago, Jewish Israelis coming to know Jesus as their Messiah used to be an extremely rare happening. In fact, 70 years ago, with the re-establishment of the State of Israel, there were only 30 Jewish believers in Jesus all over Israel. Just 30. But in the last 4 or 5 years, we see a dramatic change. And that is what I will be talking to you about today. In Israel today, we have 9 million people, and only 0.3% of them are born again Jewish believers in Jesus. How come? You would expect the numbers in Israel to be the other way around. Israel, after all, is where the gospel came from. Jesus was an Israeli Jew. The disciples were Israeli Jews, just like me. So how come? How come the numbers are so few? There are 3 main reasons to that, to the reason why Israel is an anti-Jesus nation today. Reason number 1 is replacement theology and anti-Semitism. For 2,000 years now, many in the church did not really know what to do with this concept of Israel. After all, a nation with no language, a nation with no land up until 70 years ago, is basically a nation without hope. You know that history teaches us that most nations disappear within 3 to 5 generations in that situation that we've been in for 2,000 years. So when many of the church fathers realized that most Israel rejected the gospel, they thought God probably replaced Israel, teaching that God changed his mind about the promises he gave Israel in the Old Testament. But in Romans chapter 11, Paul is arguing against it, teaching about the remnant, he himself being one of the remnant, and so am I. And he says, I ask then, did God reject his people? By no means. I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. God did not reject his people whom he foreknew. So, the problem is that replacement theology oftentimes leads to anti-Semitism. And if we look at the church history, that's exactly what we see. A few examples: the Crusades, the Inquisition. And Inquisition, if you don't know, it's when Jews would be forced to convert to Christianity against their will, and they had to choose that or dying. Pogroms. Pogroms mainly happened in the 19th and 20th century in East Europe, where mainly Catholics would come in the middle of the night into Jewish villages, put the village on fire, and massacre the people, including some of my own family. Blood labels. Blood labels is when Christians are used to tell one another, also Eastern Europe mainly, that during Passover, we Jews kidnap Christian kids, we kill them, and we turn them into matzah balls for our Passover meal. Now, this is obviously a big fat lie. We never did that. We turned them into gefilte fish. Another example is the Holocaust. My grandmother was able to escape the Holocaust not before she was tortured by the Nazis, who did things to her such as pull the nails out of her fingers, telling her that that's because she rejected Christ. If you go to the Holocaust Museum in Israel, you'll see a big picture of the Pope and Adolf Hitler together shaking hands with one another. My point is not to criticize the Catholic Church. My point is to show you how we Jews automatically associate you all, Gentile Christians, with this horrible history. We Jews think that all Christians are under the Pope, and we Jews think that, to some degree, all Christians dislike us. And that is why it's very easy for us Jews to put you all in a box and ignore your Gentile message and ignore your Gentile God. But, we cannot really escape. I cannot escape my Jewishness, even as a follower of Jesus. You only have to look at my big Jewish nose to realize that. And we and our team, we are not something foreign, something different, who speaks this other language and looks different. We are one of them. We are Jews ourselves. We are Israelis. We speak Hebrew. By the way, my French accent is not French, it's Israeli accent. And that all leads me to reason number 2. Reason number 2, I call it blind love to Israel, sometimes. And it's sometimes also known as dual covenant theology, which basically means that we Jews are saved just because we are Jews, having nothing to do to our faith or unfaith in Jesus. Okay, so if we are saved without Jesus, nobody needs to tell us. There is no reason to tell us about Jesus. So that's reason number 2. And this one is pretty much the other extreme of the first reason. It's the kind of people who love to quote to me Psalm 122, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. But they never, ever quote Paul's prayer in Romans chapter 10. My heart's desire and my prayer to God for Israel is for their salvation. So I believe that the peace King David was praying for, that we all love to quote, will only happen when Paul's prayer will become true. And I know most of you probably know by heart Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you. But my question is, what does it mean to bless Israel? How do you bless Israel? If your love for Israel is only expressed as a political love and support, then that is not really blessing Israel. I want to share with you the top causes evangelical Christians in the world give money to in Israel the most, thinking they are blessing Israel. And this is mainly for building Israel physically, building religious schools, building synagogues, building settlements, etc., etc. And I'll share with you one example. Kind of a well-known guy from here in Texas, Pastor Hagi. And a couple of years ago, he put together a large event where he gave over $3 million to 23 Israeli organizations. By the way, that's public knowledge. Okay, now, that is very generous of him. That is very generous of him. But guess how many of these organizations in Israel that the Christian money came from were of believers in Jesus? None. Absolutely none. So while these are not bad causes that the money goes to, okay, we believe that if you don't bless Israel by building us spiritually, meaning if you're not sharing with us about our Jesus, our Messiah, then are you really blessing us, or are you just sending us to hell on a full stomach? I believe that your calling as Christian Gentiles is not to buy us more tanks or build more religious schools. Your calling as Christian Gentiles is first and foremost to provoke us to jealousy. And we need to be jealous of your relationship with our God, which is only available and only possible through Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, this leads me to reason number 3. And that is what our rabbis teaches us about Jesus in those synagogues and religious schools that some of you maybe helped build. Okay, let's talk about the word Jesus, about the name Jesus. The connotation of Jesus in the West, like Europe and here in the States, is usually pretty positive. People might not like Christianity, they might not like Christians, but they're usually okay and maybe even positive with Jesus himself. If you take Jesus to Islam, he is a great prophet. It's positive. They don't see him as the Son of God, but he's a prophet. It's positive. If you take Jesus to Asia, they already believe in 300 million gods? What's one more, Only in Judaism is where Jesus has this extremely, extremely negative connotation. We already saw why, but there is more to it. I'm going to share with you a short history lesson. Okay, almost 2,000 years ago, back in 132 AD, a guy called Simon Bar Kokhba led the third Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire. When halfway through the revolt, Rabbi Akiva declared Simon Bar Kokhba, who by the way was a soldier famous of his barbaric cruelty, to be the Messiah. In the beginning of the revolt, the Jewish followers of Jesus agreed to help in what seemed at the beginning to be a campaign to fight for and protect the land of Israel and especially Jerusalem. However, after Rabbi Akiva's declaration that Bar Kokhba is the Messiah, the Jewish believers in Jesus had to withdraw from the revolt because obviously this dude is not the Messiah. We are not going to follow him. Rabbi Akiva and the Sanhedrin took it really, really bad, and they considered us to be traitors of Judaism from that point on, leading them to create rules against Jewish followers of Jesus, in order to basically kick us out of the synagogues, kick us out of Judaism. These laws forbidden other Jews to even associate with followers of Jesus. Until today, 3 times a day in every synagogue, they repeat the Birkat Haminim, which is benediction concerning the heretics. Guess who are the heretics? A prayer that is basically cursing Jesus and his followers. And we, as followers of Jesus, we cannot pray that prayer. Therefore, we cannot be in the synagogue. Therefore, we cannot be inside the heart of Judaism. Later on in the Talmud is the Jewish Holy Scriptures, the rabbis added awful, false stories about who Jesus was. One example, it says that his mother, Mary, committed adultery with a Roman soldier, and that's how Jesus came about. Another story says that Jesus was an idol worshiper who got his powers from Satan. Sounds familiar? Another story is of a guy named Onkelos, who was a Tana. A Tana is a great rabbinic sage. And in his case, he was an expert in mediumship. Mediumship is the ability to communicate with the dead. Or maybe I should be pointing down. According to that story in the Talmud, they asked Onkelos to communicate with Jesus from the dead, and so he did. And he asked Jesus, again, that's according to the story in the Talmud, not my opinion. He asked Jesus, "Where are you and what is going on with you?" And Jesus replied, "I am in hell, and my punishment is to be boiled in feces forever and ever, because I was a false Messiah and a false prophet." There are more awful stories about Jesus in the Talmud, and about us, the Jewish believers, but I think you've got the idea. In Judaism, Jesus is considered to be the worst enemy of all times. Jewish people look at Jesus as the blame for anti-Semitism in the world. Now remember, in Jewish history, any kind of a spiritual message that somebody wanted to bring in must be first approved by the gatekeepers, who are the Orthodox rabbis, who used to be the Pharisees. We see that in the New Testament, and they rejected Jesus and his message. And Jesus himself accused them in Matthew chapter 23, verse 13. Scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. And for 2,000 years now, Jesus is kept out of Judaism. And for these three reasons, you now understand why Jesus is the best kept secret in Judaism. By the way, I realize that what I've just shared with you about Jesus in the Talmud can cause your heart to react in bitterness and hatred even, enmity and resentment against Jewish people, which can lead and will lead to anti-Semitism. But please choose compassion and grace like the heart of Jesus when he was on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Amen. So now you understand why most Jews do not believe Jesus to be the Messiah, and why Jewish evangelism is so difficult like no other. Now, how is all of that relating to what is going on today and to the conference today? To make things even more difficult for you, if you take Jesus' words in Luke 13:35 as futuristic, which is, by the way, as the way most scholars do, this means that Jesus is not coming back until we, Jews, accept him. Luke 13:35, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And Jesus was talking to Israel. So we have a problem. We all want Jesus to get back, right? Don't we? But the gospel is being kept a secret from us Jews for 2,000 years now. So that's why we've been waiting for so long.